Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T, and if true crime is your jam, and like me, you enjoy delving into unsolved cases, trying to figure out who done it, please consider subscribing. Also, if you find value in my content, please do me a favor and hit that like button. The big news this week was that 41-year-old Chase Venstra has officially been cleared in Dylan Round's case. It's incredible to me that this guy could have engaged in such suspicious behavior on that Wednesday before Dylan vanished, and on the Saturday when Venstra turned up in Lucin, getting on the quad near or on Dylan's farm, etc. If Jim Brenner, who has been named a suspect in the case, really committed whatever crime led to Dylan's disappearance, and he did it solo, did Chase Venstra see something out there in Lucin while he was riding that four-wheeler? I think if Brenner did harm Dylan, he would have been frantic after the crime went down. Let's pretend that Brenner did it. And let's say he did it all by himself. Depending on how and where he harmed Dylan, he would have had some cleanup work to do. At the very least, he would have had to hide a body. We're hearing now that Brenner could have used Kurt Wadsworth's backhoe, which was at Dylan's farm. I keep wondering if the backhoe had a key, and if so, did Kurt leave it in the ignition as Dylan did with his seed truck? I even asked Salty Pancakes to ask Kurt, and he never got back to me on that. Apparently you can quickly dig a deep hole, say 12 to 15 feet, with a backhoe, and you can cradle a body in the mouth of it, and then you can quickly put that in the ground and cover up the hole. The desert doesn't give away its secret the way soil and grass do, and one heavy downpour and some wind can transform the landscape in no time. I can say these things because I live in the desert. Not the bit about the backhoe, but the other stuff. I personally think whatever happened likely went down soon after Dylan's call to his grandmother at 6:51 a.m. He had promised to call her right back after the seed truck was in that workshop. He never made that call. Just because Dylan's iPhone last pinged at 2:41 p.m. out in that 15.4-mile radius in Lucin doesn't mean Dylan was alive at that point. I think the perpetrator or perpetrators forgot about Dylan having a phone on him. Or maybe the perpetrator deliberately left it on so that it would look like Dylan was alive at that point. If Brenner skedaddled over to Don Hatley's barbecue by 3 p.m., maybe he thought that would be a close enough alibi. No one could take Dylan's life at 2:41 p.m., hide the body, and arrive at Don Hatley's barbecue by 3 p.m. looking all washed up and ready for a party. Maybe we've all been underestimating Jim Brenner's brain power. Maybe he was racking his brain all morning trying to figure out how to have a believable alibi and witnesses who could maybe attest that he was at the barbecue. Personally, I'm still stuck at the gate. Brenner is a known hothead. He's said to be trigger happy. He had to take orders from this sometimes condescending 19-year-old who could weld really well, who had a nice truck, who had a family who helped him buy a whole bunch of land and farm equipment. Dylan had the abilities to make big money, while Brenner was at the mercy of people allowing him to squat, and he had to make do with a free trailer, a ragtag car that overheats after driving it for 20 minutes. Sometimes he had to ride a horse to town, like in the olden days, Wild West, Gunsmoke. I believe that when Dylan found that gate locked, and the rain was coming down, risking his thousands of dollars of seed, he would have been pissed and impatient. He would have gunned it through that gate. And when he got to the grain shed and saw Brenner there, he would have let him have it. He was tired after planting all night, and I'm pretty sure Jim Brenner knew that Dylan was planting and that he would have needed to get that seed truck into that grain shed or workshop when that rain came down. So I think Brenner deliberately didn't answer that phone. He didn't want to deal with it. He couldn't have cared less if Dylan's seed got ruined. He wasn't exactly, clapping and encouraging the young Dylan to succeed. Perhaps Brenner wanted to sabotage Dylan's seed. And maybe he didn't want to be up at that time of morning and have to go and open the gate while it was raining. Maybe he had a smirk on his face when Dylan arrived. Maybe Brenner was hungover. An ex-boss of his said that Brenner abused alcohol. I've received a lot of comments from people who say that they can't believe anyone would kill somebody over a gate. But there are more factors at play with Jim Brenner. Brenner isn't like an average human being. He's a convicted felon, and his offenses were considered violent felonies. We know he was charged with assault with intent to murder earlier in his life. That made him pretty much unemployable in any normal town. But Montello wasn't a normal town. Several of the Wadsworths, who appear to run much of the town, they have the two primary dining establishments, one a bar and one a bar and grill, which, by the way, strikes me as odd because it's like they have to compete with one another for the meager business that's out there in this small town. And the Wadsworths also seem to own land and cabins in the area because Chase Venstra's ex-girlfriend said she was renting a cabin from Troy. We also have Troy and Scott Wadsworth, who have committed sicko crimes. For Brenner, who sounds a tad antisocial and probably wanted to live off the grid, away from the cops, among people of his own criminal ilk, Montello was like paradise. Ty Corbin has said people there don't call the police. They prefer to handle things by themselves, the old-fashioned way, by pulling out a pistol and putting it to someone's temple. Kurt Wadsworth described a story like that. In Montello and Lucin, Jim Brenner could possess firearms and even fire them, and no one would report him to the cops. Ed Hirschberger let Brenner stay on his leased land for free, even hooked him up with a free trailer, 4 walls and a roof in which to shelter from the savage desert sun and the ice and snow of winter. Do not underestimate how important it was to have a shelter. Even if it's a shabby trailer, this meant everything to Brenner. He didn't have a lot of money. No one in their right mind would hire this dangerous felon, but in Montello and Lucin, Brenner could find the odd farming job here and there, get paid in cash under the table. He could mostly be left alone, and there was beer nearby and possibly even crystal meth. It's like Disneyland for a convicted felon with substance abuse problems, anger management issues, and a love of firearms. Ed Hirschberger even gave Brenner an important, somewhat powerful role as a pseudo-security guard on that property, where he could pack a gun and freely shoot it. Ty Corbin said that it's not unusual to hear gunshots out there. No one's going to call the cops for the sound of gunshots or anything else for that matter. That trailer, the permission to live there for free without any hassles, his beloved horse, the one that Kurt Wadsworth bought for him, and those firearms. Those were all that Jim Brenner had, and they meant everything to him. He probably had a vision of retiring and spending out his days out there in Lucin. It was like the Wild West for him, and he dug it. We heard that Dylan and Jim Brenner were having a power struggle over the gate, mostly because Brenner resented having to unlock it and relock it. And remember, Kurt Wadsworth told us that Dylan only needed to use the grain shed when it rained, and Dylan would have always been in a hurry on those days because the seed in the back of the truck would be ruined if it got wet. Kurt said that Dylan had a tarp, but that it had holes in it. Dylan being in a hurry, and Brenner being mad that he had to go out in the rain to open the gate was likely a huge part of the problem, in my opinion. Then there's the threat that Dylan allegedly made to Brenner. I heard early on in this case that Dylan threatened Brenner that he was going to call the landowner and get Brenner removed from the land because he was being so uncooperative. And he probably could have told that guy that Brenner was also firing shots at random drivers who turned up to look at the sun tunnels. Imagine what went through Jim Brenner's head when Dylan said that. He knew it wasn't an idle threat. Dylan had the power to get Brenner off that land. Dylan's grandfather, Larry, knew Don Hatley and Ed Hirschberger probably too. Larry bought those 640 acres. He had money. Money equals power. He who holds the money holds the power. Where Larry and Dylan had a lot of power, Brenner had none aside from his firearms. One call from either Dylan or Larry Round and Jim Brenner would have been ripped out of that cozy trailer, booted off the land, and left wandering along the desert road in search of another sucker willing to let a violent, convicted felon squat on his land. I'm going to guess there aren't a lot of jobs and apartment rentals for convicted felons who've committed violent felonies. Brenner didn't have a lot of options. He needed to stay on that land and in that trailer. And Dylan, threatening to take those things away, would likely have pushed Brenner into a corner like a shaking little fat rat. Between Dylan's not paying Brenner the full amount for the potato deliveries, his threat to call the landowner, and whatever happened when Dylan got to the gate in the rain only to find it locked on that Saturday morning, I would bet that Dylan was enraged, and I also believe that Brenner had had just about enough of Dylan, the gate issue, and the threat. Get him mad enough, and his brain stops thinking rationally, and his temper goes into overdrive. He pulls out a firearm, and he says, "F you, you POS brat. Take this." Boom. He overreacts, and then he panics because now he's got to get rid of a body and clean up the scene of the crime, and he has to pull all of that off without anyone seeing him. Someone of short stature appears to have driven Dylan's red Ford F-150 truck because the seat was all the way forward. The four-wheel drive was on and the door was locked. Dylan never did any of those three things. Brenner may even have power washed the truck and the ground around it to cover up evidence. Is it possible that Venstra saw something in passing when he was driving that four-wheeler? Maybe. But then again, the desert is expansive, and we're talking about 5 miles between Brenner's trailer and Dylan's farm. So it's entirely possible that Venstra didn't actually witness anything. If Brenner harmed Dylan right away that morning, say when Dylan arrived at the grain shed, maybe around 7:15 or 7:30, that would have given Brenner ample time to hide a body and clean up. Brenner had until, say, 2:45 p.m., right? Don Hatley said Brenner showed up at his barbecue at 3 p.m. And that ping from Dylan's phone occurred not far from Hatley's property, from what I heard. I think Brenner ditched it at the last possible minute before walking up to Hatley's residence. He needed an alibi, and maybe he thought he could squeeze into that barbecue unnoticed and then lie to Kurt Wadsworth and probably the cops too. Remember, Kurt told Salty Pancakes that Brenner told him he was at Don Hatley's house from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. But Don said that he was actually there from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Could Brenner have picked that time frame, the 1 to 5 p.m., because he knew he committed the crime maybe between 1 and 2? Just a thought. It's not a lot of time to do the deed and clean up, but it would have given him an alibi, right? If he said he was at the party from 1 to 5. Can someone please ask Don Hatley what Jim Brenner looked like and acted like when he turned up at that barbecue? Was he red from running around? Or was he cool as a cucumber because he's a cold-hearted monster like Ted Bundy? Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories Podcast, do me a favor, smash the like button, leave me a comment, subscribe. Come on, I put out some good stuff. See you next time.